I might have been wrong about Obsidian Entertainment's next upcoming RPG, Avowed, because I was pretty hesitant in terms of this game as a whole before it released, criticizing stuff like the combat or criticizing stuff like the tone of the game overall, and also criticizing a lot of the consumer practices like 5-day early access and a $90 pre-order version, as well as releasing this game full price for $70 for a AA studio, even going as far to criticize the timing of the release of this game, which is going to be in February with a bunch of other big RPGs and releases like Kingdom Come Deliverance, Monster Hunter Wilds, and more. But as of yesterday, a lot of different content creators were able to release their first impressions on the preview of the game, which I believe was about 10 to 20 hours long, where they couldn't explore the entire game, but they could explore a decent portion to get a feel for how the game is, and a lot of them are having pretty overwhelmingly positive reactions to the game as a whole, and being very impressed by their experience considering what they thought going into it. But before we get to why this makes me very excited for this RPG, as well as why I think it now has a better chance to compete with some of these other games in February, thank you guys so much for 800 subscribers. I really appreciate the support. If you're new to the channel and you like gaming news and gaming reviews specifically with RPGs and action adventure type of games, please subscribe and like the video. If you like the video, it helps me out a lot. Now let's get into the content. So the biggest thing that I was worried about for Avowed was the combat. I was worried that it was going to feel unimpactful, or it was going to be too bland and too stale, similar to something like the old Elder Scrolls games like Skyrim, which a lot of people are obviously comparing this game to, fair or not. But it's one thing to just look at the combat like I have and say that, but it's another to actually get your hands on the game and play it. We've seen tons of games in the past that don't look like they have good combat, but when you play the game, it feels weighty, it feels good, it's very interactive, and overall ends up being a very fun, good combat system, and that looks like what's happening with Avowed.
I would say the combat in Avowed feels pretty darn good. If we're continuing to make comparisons to Skyrim, which I get probably getting tired by now, it feels leagues better than that, like substantially better. I mostly played melee, going with this fighter build, primarily using a shield as well as a one-handed weapon, although I was starting to make use of ranged more often, using muskets and pistols later on into my session. Everything here has a nice sense of impact, good sounds, good animations, enemies responding to being struck. All around, I think the combat felt good.
I will say that while it definitely has a little bit of like jank and awkward animation here and there, combat feels a lot more impactful than it looks, which is a hard thing to convey over video. But when you're actually attacking things and being hit, when you actually have the controls in your hands and stuff, you can feel a lot of that in a way that, again, is just better than it looks simply being on screen. So hopefully that is something people see when they actually get the chance to play it for themselves, but I was pleasantly surprised by that.
So both Force and Mortismal kind of confirm that the gameplay feels a lot better than it looks, at least with the combat, and that's something I'm super excited for. Also, go check out their channels. They're great YouTubers, play a lot of the same games that I get excited for. But on top of this, in terms of like combat mechanics, you're going to have your light attack, you're going to have your heavy attack, there's going to be a stagger bar, there's going to be parries within the game, you're going to have your different abilities. So there seems like to be a lot of variety as well with the combat, on top of it just feeling good and being an overly positively received combat so far. Now, another thing that I wanted to see from Avowed specifically was the choices and the dialogue options, and is this going to actually be meaningful in terms of what happens on different quests or the overall story of the game, or even your relationship with different characters and companions. And although I haven't seen a ton of feedback on all of this, I think what they played is probably too early or too little to really tell. I have seen a lot of good feedback regarding the different dialogues, the different dialogue options, talking to some of the different characters, as well as how you can approach different conversations in different situations and even different quests within the game.
Is really different from any Obsidian game you've played before. It's very different from Fallout New Vegas, where you could just talk your way through things. It's very different from the Outer Worlds, where you could definitely shoot or talk your way through things. In this game, you can stealth. In this game, there are multiple options of approach, and I found it to be refreshingly great and fitting for an Obsidian game, because the choice wasn't just in its dialogue and how I would handle my approach with certain situations, but also how I would crawl about the level. I felt there was an equal level of choice there. Conversations in this game can be very long in a good way. Like, I love that when I'm choosing to settle down and have a chat with one of my party members that we can really get into the weeds of it. Like, we were just recapping all the things that happened since we first met, and then there were plenty of questions afterwards that I could have asked Kai just to learn more about him, learn more about this world. And I just love how, similar to an older BioWare game, I can just dive deep into these characters and spend a lot of time talking to them.
So this really excites me, and hopefully we see a little bit more about like the choices within dialogue and the conversations and the consequences based on those. I'm really excited to see that. We have seen some already within the preview in regards to finding someone on the road, and you can choose whether to kill him and loot his stuff or whether to help him out and do his quest, and who knows how meaningful that's going to be in the grand scope of the game, or meaningful it's just going to be with that specific quest. We don't really necessarily know yet, and how many of these are going to be in the game from start to finish, but so far I'm very optimistic about it. I'm very excited for what we have heard so far. I love how you can really go deep into talking with these characters and have very long conversations with them. I feel like in terms of immersion within a specific world, this is one of the best ways you can do it. Not only are you going to get closer to your companion, but you're also going to learn more about the world as a whole and really immerse your own character into that environment. Now, aside from these two things, we've also seen some stuff about the character creation, which I think actually aims to be pretty impactful in this game, with a ton of different dialogue options, not only from your character, but also from other people you're talking to, referencing what you end up choosing in terms of your class and your character's background, and even supposedly things like your stats.
Said though, the character creator does bring one great element to the forefront, and that is dialogue. So when you're building your character, you can choose like your backstory, if you will. Like, I was an arcane scholar, and oh my gosh, it is used so frequently. I think some people will actually feel like it's too much. It might even feel to them, I put this in quotes, watered down, because to be fair, it is a lot of flavor text. It's not like every skill check you're doing is finding a new solution somewhere. This is a lot of flavor text, but it gave me a true sense of self of who I wanted to be, down to my attributes, where I'm a much more perceptive individual and I'm an arcane scholar. So I was kind of playing this egotistical mage, if you will.
And I think all of this is going to tie together to probably create a pretty immersive experience in the same world of Pillars of Eternity, which a lot of people have already played, know, and love. So going forward, I now want to talk about the progression, because we've already talked about the combat, how you can use the combat, the dialogue, and the different choices you have to approach different situations in the game and discuss different things with companions, and the way that the world can immerse you, not only with the character creation, but also with those choices and different actions that you partake in. But now, how are you going to actually progress and level up your character throughout the game to keep it feeling fresh, to keep the gameplay fun, and to also see what type of builds you can make?
In terms of progression, this is an RPG, and there's quite a lot of it. You will level powering yourself up. You've got abilities to pick from. These are broken up into 4 different categories. There is Fighter, Ranger, Wizard, and then the Godlike abilities. Fighter is basically your melee and tank focus. Ranger is range weapons as well as stealth. The Wizard is your mage, and then the Godlike abilities you unlock no matter which class spec you decide to go with. These are mostly tied to the main story quest. You start off with Backstab as your first Godlike ability. The next one that I unlocked was this AoE damage and heal ability, and then I also got a passive HP boost as well. It looks like, based on what I see here, there's going to be 4 additional active and passive skills that you unlock later on. I should note that you can mix and match as you please from the 3 different class trees, however you like. For example, I started as Fighter, but I eventually picked up a few skills in the Ranger tree, mainly increasing my one-handed damage, since I was using a lot of one-handed melee weapons. There are both active and passive skills in those trees, and each skill has multiple ranks you can increase. You unlock more of them as you progress every 5 levels. And then there's also a whole section for abilities that you unlock for your companion. Also, when you level up, you get character stat increases called attribute points. These consist of 6 categories. There is Might, Constitution, Dexterity, Perception, Intellect, and Resolve. You start out with a certain distribution of these based on whatever you picked during character creation, and then for every level you get 1 additional point that you can spend. Looks like there's some diminishing returns here which incentivize spreading them out. You can also find gear that will add additional attribute points as well, besides what's in this panel. Speaking of gear, there's a lot of gear to find in this game. One of my favorite things, looking around, getting good gear, trying different builds based on the unique gear that I find. Massive amounts of variety here. In fact, I counted 15 different classes of weapons in the game, game, and there might be even more. That's just what I've found so far. These include muskets, axes, bows, daggers, great axes, grimoires, pistols, spears, wands, and there is more. In addition to the weapons, you've also got armor. There is a base armor, which basically consists of like your chest, shoulders, and legs. It's one piece, just called armor. And then there is also a slot for gloves, a slot for boots, an amulet, and 2 ring slots. And then for all of the gear that you find, it's going to drop in different rarities and quality, with the most valuable gear being uniques, the yellow items that are of high value and also come with special bonuses.
So overall, I think it seems to be a pretty standard RPG system in terms of your progression. However, there are a ton of different options here. I really enjoy how it's kind of like an open class system and you can mix and match different abilities from different trees. I love how you have the actives and the passives that you can kind of build, as well as your companion abilities as well. The gear seems overly pretty damn good, kind of taking something out of the book of an ARPG where there's a ton of different stats, a ton of different bonuses, as well as unique items, and all of this I think is going to be very welcomed into making very diverse and very deep builds within the game, and probably enabling a lot of replayability. There also will be different passive bonuses that are going to be permanent for your character you can find throughout the world when you're exploring, which takes me into the next and the last portion of this game I want to talk about, which is the exploration, because this is going to be a single player, non-open world RPG, but it looks like it's going to have a lot of different big open areas that you can explore that are a lot bigger than what we initially thought.
Avowed feels like a condensed, jam-packed version of Skyrim, as you're going to be looking for loot, talking to NPCs, and picking fights with the local bandits, lizards, skeletons, and spiders, all of which there's plenty of all around.
We have already heard from the content creators that have played the game that this is already 10 to 15 hours of just what they played, which is probably only about 1/5 to 1/6 of the entire game, considering how small of a portion of the overall map that it is, and they didn't even get to play one of the biggest cities in that area, Paradise, which is probably going to take you to a lot of these other areas as well. So the first area probably has about 15 to 20 hours of gameplay if you are a completionist, and that is just scratching the surface, because these areas, aside from what Force talked about, what you can do within them, also end up being very open area, almost open world. They're not necessarily fully open world. There's a lot of different areas. They're very open with packed points of interest, and the only issue here is I've heard a little bit about how some of these points of interests are lackluster, and there's not a huge amount of enemies in terms of density within the land as a whole. But all of the different things that you can do in these areas in terms of finding all of these different chests, you can even swim in this game to find some other chests, all of the quests that you can do, the open area feel of just walking around and finding all of these different points of interests seems very exciting to me, especially if this is just a small portion of the game and the game is going to be extremely massive. It honestly might end up feeling like an open world just done right, except for obviously not technically open world. But that concludes pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in this video, and why I am way more excited now after seeing these previews than I originally was, after seeing what all of these content creators have to say, like Force, Maddie Plays, and Mortismal. 3 content creators I think do a pretty good job making very balanced reviews for the most part about some of these games. Obviously some are a little bit more positive, some are a little bit more negative, but overall they had great experiences, and all of them came away from this game thinking that it's going to be one of the best games of next year, and it's one of their most anticipated, if not their most anticipated game for 2025, even over things like Monster Hunter Wilds and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. And that gets me pretty damn excited and starts to make me think this one might compete a lot more than I originally thought come release in February. Thank you guys for watching the video. Let me know down below in the comments what you guys think about what we've seen from Avowed so far, if you're more or less excited for it, and if you're thinking about getting this game in February, or you're going to wait and play some of these other ones instead. I would definitely love to hear what you guys have to say. Like the video if you like the video, and subscribe for more content like this. I'll see you in the next one. Peace!